berries, bears, and a big black dog. The summer of 1918 lay heavy and green over the southern Ozarks, and along the banks of Big Sugar Creek, not far from the Powell Bridge, Ezra Somerset and his wife Barbara kept their small farm the way a body keeps a good fire, with steady tending and quiet satisfaction. Everyone who knew Barbara called her Babs, and she answered to it with the easy grace of a woman who'd long since made her peace with the name. It was a modest life they'd made, the two of them, without children filling the rooms or the yard, but they weren't lonely. Not exactly, because they had Trouble. Trouble was a large black dog of no traceable ancestry, and he'd come to them the way certain animals do, by refusing to leave. They hadn't invited him. He'd been riding unknown in the back of the wagon one afternoon when they returned from the general store in Powell, and when the horse drew up near the house and Ezra climbed down, the dog jumped out bold as you please and stood in the yard as though he'd built the fence himself. What were they to do? The dog had chosen them, and there's a kind of authority in that a person can't easily argue with. Babs hadn't always welcomed the arrangement, particularly when she would find her freshly laundered sheets and nightgowns strewn across the ground, the clothesline bare and swinging, and she'd chase him across the yard with a switch cut from a twig, cursing his hide in language that would have mortified the preacher. However, in the way of things between women and difficult creatures, she'd come to keep a soft place for him, even if she wouldn't have said so aloud. It was late August, or the first cool edge of September, when Babs decided to make a gooseberry pie. Ezra favoured gooseberry above all others, and she knew the woods well enough to find a stand of the bushes where they grew wild and thick along the hollow. The days had begun to shorten almost imperceptibly, the afternoons carrying just a suggestion of what was coming, and Babs had felt the familiar seasonal restlessness that drives a good cook toward the kitchen with something to prove. She took her basket and started out into the timber, the morning still holding a little of the night's coolness in it, and the light coming through the canopy in long shifting columns the way it does before the heat of the day takes full hold. Trouble followed her, as he always did when she moved through the world with any sense of purpose, trotting along at her left side, with his big head swinging and his nose reading the air. She found her ripe purple berries without much trouble, the clusters hanging fat and promising among the leaves. She'd been at her picking for a good while, her fingers stained and her basket growing heavy, when a sound in the brush brought her up short. It was a soft rustling at first, the kind a squirrel might make, but then the branches parted and a black bear cub stepped out into the open and sat back on its haunches looking at her with small, curious eyes. It was a charming little thing, round-bellied and sleek, and Babs felt the natural pull of it, the way any woman might soften at the sight of something so young and uncertain in the world. Nevertheless, her pleasure didn't last long, because she understood in the same moment what the cub's presence meant, and the thought arrived cold and certain in the warm morning air. She heard it then, the crack and thrash of something heavy moving fast through the undergrowth, and the she-bear came through the brush on a run, her great head low and her eyes fixed on Babs with a ferocity that needed no interpretation. Babs couldn't have said afterward whether she screamed first or reached for the fallen branch first, but she had time to do neither before Trouble put himself between her and the bear with a courage that had no calculation in it, only the pure animal conviction that this was his woman, and he'd be damned before he'd step aside. The fight was terrible to hear and to witness. Trouble was no small dog, but the bear outweighed him considerably and knew how to use her weight, and the noise of it, the snarling and the crashing, and Babs screaming her distress, carried out across the field to where Ezra was working, not a quarter-mile away. He came running the way a man runs when he hears his wife's voice go to a pitch it doesn't ordinarily reach, calling her name as he came, the dread of what he might find tightening in his chest with every stride. When he broke through the tree line and saw what was in front of him, he didn't stop to consider his options at length. Babs had gotten hold of a stout branch from the ground, and Ezra took it from her hands without ceremony and laid it across the bear's back once, twice, and a third time with everything he had. The bear turned from the dog then, which was something, though it turned toward Ezra, which was something else entirely. She knocked him down with one swipe of her forepaw, and he hit the ground hard and lay there with the branch held crosswise in both hands, the bear's teeth working toward his face while he strained to keep the wood between them, his arms burning with the effort and the ground solid and cool against his back. Trouble wasn't finished. Nobody ever did come to learn exactly where he bit that mother bear the last time, but whatever he found, the bear's response was immediate and operatic. She let out a sound that shook the leaves and rose up on her hind legs to her full height, standing there in the filtered light with her eyes moving from Ezra on the ground to the dog to the cub still watching from the edge of the brush. Then she dropped to all fours, turned, and went back into the timber at a run, the cub scrambling after her, and in a few moments there was nothing left of either of them but the sound of their going, fading into the deep green quiet of the woods. Trouble was cut and bitten in several places and walked with a limp. But there was a bearing about him that afternoon that wasn't hard to read. He moved through the yard with the slow deliberateness of a dog who understood his own worth and was content to let the evidence speak for itself. Ezra limped too, leaning on Babs as they made their slow way back across the field and into the house, where she cleaned his wounds with the practical tenderness of a woman who loves a man enough to scold him while she tends to him. He'd heal without lasting damage, the doctor confirmed. And he did, though it took some days of comfortable bed rest and the kind of solicitous attention that a man who's fought a bear tends to receive without argument. The story would be told many times after that, in the years that followed, told in the feed store and on front porches and at the Sunday dinner table. And it had the quality of a good story in that it improved naturally with the retelling without requiring much embellishment. Ezra had a gift for a dramatic pause, and Babs could describe the cub's expression with a precision that made people lean forward in their chairs. The next evening, she set a generous slice of gooseberry pie in front of Ezra, its crust the colour of a good autumn afternoon, and its filling still warm from the oven. The smell of it alone was enough to make the whole adventure seem, if not worth it exactly, then at least a fair exchange. Trouble got his piece too, set down on the floor in his own dish, and Babs gave him 2 slow, deliberate pats on the broad crown of his head that he accepted without moving, his eyes half closed, as though he'd expected nothing less and wanted nothing more. The bear and her cub were never seen in those woods again. Whether they'd moved on to quieter territory or simply learned the hard wisdom of discretion, nobody along Big Sugar Creek could say.